breaking news.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Bash. Kate is off today. We are following breaking news out of Russia. We have a verdict in the Brittany Griner trial. Griner has been found guilty of smuggling cannabis oil in her luggage back in February. She pled guilty last month in the hopes of being granted leniency. Right now, you see that the WNBA star is in the courtroom. It's just outside of Moscow, and prosecutors, as we speak, are asking for a sentence of 9.5 years in prison. I'm going to go straight to CNN's Fred Pleiken, who is live outside the courtroom near Moscow. So, Fred, what is the latest? What are we hearing about how that sentencing will go?
Yeah, I mean, it really is significant information that we're getting, Dana. First of all, you're absolutely right, so that the court has found Brittany Griner guilty. And as we see on our screens right now, the judge is still sort of reading out the verdict and what exactly the specifics of this verdict are. But there is already something that's very important that the judge has read in saying that that they have found Brittany Griner guilty with criminal intent. That means that the court believes, what the prosecution has said, that they believe that Brittany Griner intentionally took narcotics to the Russian Federation, obviously talking about those 2 vaping cartridges. And you'll recall that one of the cases, or one of the things that the defense team tried to establish, and Brittany Griner tried to establish, was that she did not intend to take these vaping cartridges into Russia, that she packed very quickly, very hastily, and by accident, they might have ended up in her luggage, and that's how they were on her when she was stopped here at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport on February 17th. Now, it seems as though the court had, in that case at least, has not followed what the defense wanted, is saying that this was something that was done intentionally. We are not sure yet about the sentencing. They've not gotten to the sentencing yet, but Brittany Griner has been found guilty. And another thing that I have for you as well, Dana, I was actually able to speak to Brittany Griner's defense lawyers as they walked back into the courtroom a couple of minutes ago, and they said that if there is a guilty verdict, depending on the sentence, they will go into an appeals process. And right now we know there is a guilty verdict, but again, we're still waiting for the sentencing. But presumably it could be quite a tough sentence because the judge said that they believe that this was done intentionally, Dana.
So interesting. That criminal intent is exactly what her attorneys and she were trying to argue was not the case. They are saying that they didn't buy it. I want to bring in CNN's Kylie Atwood at the State Department. So, Kylie, based on what Fred was just reporting, what is your sense from your sources where you are at the State Department about how hard it is going to be, or not, to take the next step? And the next step, everybody expects, will be an attempt at a prisoner swap.
Yeah, well, today will have an impact on that next step. And that's because when you talk to U.S. officials, the expectation that was any potential prisoner swap wouldn't actually come to fruition until Brittany Griner confessed guilt. So she pled guilty back in July, and she expressed that she was sorry that she committed this, though she didn't intend to, today, again, in the courtroom, and also that there would have to be sentencing in this trial. So that's why today will have an impact on the ongoing efforts to try and secure a prisoner swap to get Brittany Griner home. Now, the backdrop to all of this, however, is that the Biden administration hasn't just been sitting on its hands waiting for this day. They were trying to get the wheels in motion back in June when they did put an offer on the table with the Russians, offering up Victor Bout. He's a convicted arms smuggler serving a 25-year prison sentence here in the U.S. for Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. The Russians haven't exactly played ball. They put another offer, counter offer through some back channels on the table for a Russian who's actually serving time in Germany right now. So basically, they haven't been able to have productive conversations to make an agreement about that prisoner swap. And that's why today is important, because the expectation was that when there's a sentence, it may allow them to move forward in those discussions. I do think it's important, Dana, though, to point out that the judge is saying that she did this deliberately, and that is exactly contradictory to what Brittany Griner has said is the story here. She said she was, in her words, rush packing when she was packing up to go over to Russia to play on this team. She had just been getting over COVID. She was trying to get all of her things together, and that's how this cannabis oil accidentally ended up still in her bag. But of course, the judge is making the determination that he believes that it was actually a deliberate act, and that could impact the sentence that we're expecting over the course of the next few minutes or hours here.
Oh, absolutely, it could. And I'm glad that you underscored that point. I mentioned it earlier, but we have to say it over and over again, just because this is the verdict, just because this is what she has been found guilty of, a criminal intent. That's not what she claims. She claims that it was she brought the cannabis, the vaping material, over to Russia by accident. All right, Kylie, stand by as we wait for this verdict. I want to go now to CNN contributor Jill Doherty. She is, of course, former CNN Moscow bureau chief. Jill, so many things to talk to you about. First of all, I just want to mention just the imagery of what we're seeing. And it's so striking for people. We have covered so many trials here in the U.S., and we are used to seeing a defendant in street clothes in a courtroom. And this is Russia. This is not the U.S. This is not a Western democracy. And so what we see is somebody trying to defend herself while in prison garb behind bars.
Yes, and that is, for Americans and probably for some Europeans, that's pretty shocking, because a person in a cage looks really frightening. And don't forget, she's extremely tall, so she has to lean over a lot of the time. There are a lot of images here that are, I hear some translation going on. Do we want to go to that?
I think you can continue. They'll let us know when we have the sentencing.
All right.
Thanks, though. Because you speak Russian, you can probably understand more than we can. So if you hear something, let us know.
Okay, but I was what I was trying to say. The optics are really, really kind of frightening. And then you have let's call it the official legal case moves forward. So essentially where we are, we just got the guilty verdict, and with that troubling criminal intent, that is not good, criminal intent. And then part two will be the sentence. And you'd almost have to think, if it goes according to kind of how Russian law usually goes, that could be harsh, because after all, if there was criminal intent and that was found, that is a bad sign, and it could be that the sentence would be, what the prosecutors were asking for, which is 9.5 years in a work colony. But then you get to the political side of it. When that's all over, it's up to the leaders of both countries to decide what to do, and whether or not to have a prisoner swap. I mean, there could be one, and then what would it be? Or there could not be one, which would also be a very troubling sign. The United States obviously wants one very much. This is a big deal in the United States, a lot of public pressure. In Russia, it is not that much of a big deal. The story is being covered, of course, but there's not a lot of public pressure in Russia right now, Dana. So Putin isn't in as much public pressure or under a lot of time pressure either.
But what Putin, Jill, if I may, is obviously eager to do is to extract something from the U.S. These are not wonderful times in U.S.-Russian relations. I don't need to tell you or anybody who's not been under a rock for the past, year or so. What do you think the ask is realistically going to be from Putin in order to entertain a prisoner swap to get Brittany Griner back to the U.S.?
Originally with the Victor Bout potential deal, one man, an arms dealer, a very big deal, for Russia. But is it right in Russian eyes to trade one man for two Americans? Because Russians are very big on, equal and parity, tit for tat type of thing. So they might approach it as, we're not going to give up one person for two. That's, entirely possible. It's that part of it is kind of hard, because then you have the situation where Vladimir Putin right now, as you pointed out, is able to make it very uncomfortable for the Biden administration. And Putin right now, because of this big thing overhanging everything, which is the war in Ukraine, he doesn't have a lot of ways of making things uncomfortable. Right now, Russia and he are being made uncomfortable with sanctions, criticism, etc. So here's Vladimir Putin's chance to kind of, play hard to get, make it difficult for the Biden administration. And he may want to play that out. He may want to give it some time and think it over. And meanwhile, Brittany Griner has to go through this legal process because they are going to appeal.
Yeah. I want to bring in CNN sports analyst Christine Brennan. Christine, as you watch this, as you look at this image of Brittany Griner behind bars there waiting to hear not the verdict. We know, again, she has been found guilty, but the sentencing. I wonder what your thoughts are. And as you answer that, I just want to sort of inject one thing here, which is that the reason Brittany Griner and other women are in Russia playing basketball is because they don't get paid anywhere near what the men get paid in the U.S., and that's just what they do.
Exactly, Dana. Brittany Griner's salary, the top salary in the WNBA, is about $230,000, $240,000. With bonuses, you can get it up another couple $100,000. The top salary in the NBA is over $40 million. So hundreds of thousands for the women, and 40 million is obviously the high range for the NBA for the men. So yes, they go overseas, they play. It's not just Russia, it's China, it's Spain, it's Italy, it's Turkey, and this is where they can supplement their salaries. And that's what Brittany Griner was doing. Obviously, she was flying into Russia at an incredibly fraught time, a week before Putin unleashed his horrors on Ukraine. Nonetheless, she did that. And here she is. And I think you're right. To kind of set the scene again, Dana, to remind everyone, Brittany Griner is 6'9". There she sits, 6'9" in that cage. She's a two-time Olympic gold medalist. She has represented the nation beautifully, winning 2 gold medals with the U.S. women's basketball team, the most dominant team in all of sports internationally, worldwide, U.S. women's basketball. She's one of the stars, and she has won 2 gold medals for the United States, as well as also playing overseas for the U.S., representing the country in other ways. A multiple-time WNBA All-Star, an NCAA champion at Baylor, on and on it goes. One of our true sports heroes. And it's really hard to look at this and see that person in that cage.
So well said. 7-time All-Star. You can fact check me on that, Christine, but 7-time All-Star is what we have. It's pretty amazing. In addition to, as you said, 2-time Olympic gold medalist. Stand by, everybody. Again, we are waiting for the sentencing in this trial. More breaking news into CNN, though. Charges in the case of Attorney General Merrick Garland just announced new charges against 4 Louisville police officers involved in the death of Breonna Taylor.
Earlier today, I spoke with the family of Breonna Taylor. This morning, they were informed that the Justice Department has charged 4 current and former Louisville Metro Police Department officers with federal crimes related to Ms. Taylor's death. Those alleged crimes include civil rights offenses, unlawful conspiracies, unconstitutional use of force, and obstruction offenses. The 4 defendants were charged through 2 separate indictments and 1 information.
CNN's Jessica Schneider is here in Washington with the latest. Jessica?
This investigation into Breonna Taylor's death, in terms of the federal civil rights component, this has been ongoing for a very long time here. There's a large team of investigators. And in fact, Breonna Taylor's mother met with the Justice Department just a few months ago in March, pressing them to file charges against these officers. And in fact, as you heard from the Attorney General today, 4 officers from the Louisville Police Department have in fact been charged. What's interesting is that these are different officers who then those who were on the scene that night of that fatal shooting. There's 1 officer who was on the scene that night. He has been charged for unconstitutional excessive force for firing 10 shots into the side of the building, into the side window that went into Breonna Taylor's apartment and other neighbors. But in addition to that, 1 officer 3 officers who were involved in crafting the search warrant for Breonna Taylor's home have been charged in this. They've been charged with conspiracy, knowingly falsifying a warrant here. And the premise is that they relied on false information that they knew was false to get a search warrant for Breonna Taylor's home. This was an ongoing investigation into narcotics trafficking. And the Attorney General here says that these officers knew that some of the information they put into the search warrant for Breonna Taylor's home was false. Notably, that her house had received packages for the target in this investigation, and that information was actually false. So the basis of this search warrant for Breonna Taylor's home was false here, and that's why 3 of the officers involved in that warrant are now being charged. So really, Dana, this has been a months-long investigation, now resulting in 4 federal charges, 4 officers being charged federally with various constitutional violations. This is something that Breonna Taylor's family has been pressing for here. You know, this is really the first big set of charges for these officers. 1 officer was charged with state charges. He was ultimately acquitted, but this is something that the family has been pressing for, and now charges on the federal level will move forward against these 4 officers in the death of Breonna Taylor. Dana?
Jessica, thank you so much for breaking that down. I want to bring in former U.S. Attorney Michael Moore. And as somebody who has been working with the feds, you've been on the federal level pressing charges, obviously, on various cases. That was your job as U.S. Attorney. Put this in perspective.
Well, I'm glad to be with you this morning, and it's obviously good news, I think, for the Taylor family, and a long time coming. It reminds me of sort of the ineptness of what went on with the state investigation. This is information that could have been uncovered early had they verified the information put into a state search warrant. But when you have the Department of Justice come in and charge a conspiracy case, or really, I guess, lying on the front end about the case and perhaps covering up later, it's a big deal, and it means prison time if convicted for these officers. Unfortunately, I think it's a more common occurrence maybe than we all want to admit. Having things put in a search warrant that has not been verified. It's information maybe that somebody said, well, they heard from somebody else and didn't corroborate with the witness. That's always a concern, and in this case, you know, leading to tragic consequences. So. I'm proud to see the investigation has moved forward to this state. Again, I wish that they had done a more thorough job of checking the search warrants, but it's oftentimes the cover-up in cases and sort of the lying and the preparation that catches people when they do wrong, and it seems to have rung true again today.
And as Jessica was saying, only 1 officer on a state level, local level, has been charged with anything relating to Breonna Taylor's killing, who was actually there.
Right.
Is this the end of the road for the federal investigation, or could they go further and focus more on the officers who were actually there?
I think they'll probably go further. Again, this has been breaking as we've been coming on air, so I haven't seen the documents, but it sounds to me like they've got some room to basically flip cooperators to get witnesses to talk, especially if they have a separate accusation and the indictment. You know, that's sometimes an indication that they intend to have a cooperator in a case. I think they'll probably use these people and say, look, you're going to prison. You can tell us what went on. You can talk about statements made after the fact. You may have information related to the sort of the debrief after the raid. We need to hear that as it relates to more specific civil rights cases as we think about civil rights claims, typically with the use of the excessive force of the case. I don't know that anybody in their right mind could have looked at this case and not thought that something wrong happened. And that's part of the frustration with the state. I mean, I don't know how you can even have a cursory or first grade review of the facts and not be troubled by what you see. And so my guess is they'll go a little deeper.
And in these times when we're talking about you know, the legal ramifications of the killing, we should remember the victim here, and her name is Breonna Taylor. And one of the things that has been changed on a local level in Louisville is what's known as Breonna's Law. It was passed in June of 2020, which bans the kind of warrant that these officers got, and maybe most importantly requires officers to wear body cameras, which was not done in this case.
That's right. And I mean, I think you're 100% right. We ought to say Breonna's name at every chance. We end up talking about charges and officers and investigations. Don't remember the person who paid sort of the ultimate price for some of the sloppiest law enforcement work that we've seen in a warrant of this type in a long time. The body cameras are as good as the officers who will turn them on and activate them and not lose them. And while I applaud any effort to keep people accountable, I'm mindful that we're talking about in another case or another investigation of big import with the Department of Justice and Congress, the loss of messages and how things are deleted and text messages are gone and that type of thing. And so what you don't want to see is body cameras whose footage is ultimately erased or suddenly or mistakenly misplaced and that type of thing. So anything we can do to keep people safe and keep people accountable, I applaud. And again, let me say that we have a lot of great law enforcement officers. This ought not be a black eye on all of them.
Michael,
for the people who try to do right.
I'm going to have to cut you off because we have a sentencing announcement in Russia. A judge announcing Brittany Griner's sentencing moments ago. I want to go straight to Fred Plankin. Fred, tell us what happened.
Hi, Dana. Yeah, and it's a pretty harsh sentence. It's a very harsh sentence, actually, that the judge has handed down. The judge has obviously said that Brittany Griner is considered to be guilty for criminally trying to bring narcotics into the Russian Federation, and she's been sentenced to 9 years of jail time and 1 million rubles. That's around $16,400 US in a fine as well. But of course, 9 years, an extremely long period of time. That 9 years in a penal colony. They did say that there were some mitigating circumstances, like for the fact that she had pleaded guilty, that she had admitted her guilt, and other things as well. Obviously, also that she was, a high-class individual and someone who was very important to the Russian Federation. Nevertheless, an extremely harsh sentence. And I want to read to you just a little bit, because also the lawyers for Brittany Griner, they've already voiced their disappointment. They put out a statement saying, "We are disappointed by the verdict. As legal professionals, we believe that the court should be fair to everyone, regardless of nationality. The court completely ignored all the evidence of the defense and, most importantly, the guilty plea." So therefore, the defense obviously saying they are extremely disappointed by this verdict. No doubt Brittany Griner will be as well. Again, 9 years in a penal colony. One of the things, however, that the judges told me, Dana, as they walked back into the courtroom before this last session started, is they said that if a verdict like this came down, they were going to go into an appeals process. And of course, at the same time, of course, we always have to tell our viewers that there are those efforts by the United States to try and get a prisoner exchange for Brittany Griner as well. But this certainly an extremely tough verdict. We had been talking about the fact before that Russian courts are known to be extremely tough, that the conviction rate is very high, and certainly the sentence is very high as well. But here you have it, 9 years for Brittany Griner after being convicted of taking 2 vaping cartridges or trying to take them into the Russian Federation with what the court established to be 0.7 of a gram in total between those 2 cartridges. And even that was obviously called into question by the defense. But 9 years, very tough sentence for Brittany Griner, Dana.
It certainly is. And Fred, stand by. I want our viewers to see the moment when the judge actually read the sentence, the maximum sentence, the one the prosecutors asked for, 9 years in a penal colony.
Final verdict is 9 years of imprisonment of the 9 million rubles penalty in the penal colony. And she will serve her term from the day of the announcement of this verdict. And time when she was behind bars from the 18th of February 2022 will be included in the overall term.
Jill Doherty, former CNN Moscow bureau chief, is back with us. Just watching that is, it's heart-wrenching, and thinking about all of the factors in play here, not the least of which is she's 31 years old. She is somebody who is quite literally at the top of her game in the WNBA. And now she is, according to that translation, immediately going to go to a penal colony. I know we're going to talk in a moment about the potential for a prison swap. But since she's going right now, can you explain to our viewers here around the world, what does that mean? What does a Russian penal colony look like and entail?
You know, it depends on which one. There will be work to be done. Now, it could be harsh work, you know, kind of labor, or it could be making things kind of like, you know, sewing uniforms and things like that. We'll have to see exactly where she will be going. But this is really, really sobering. But this is kind of what was expected because of the way that the Russian law is set up, and the fact that very few people are ever exonerated, and the fact that they said, you know, the guilty verdict was with criminal intent. So the judge is really, you know, pushing minor, like 6 months off because of a few extenuating circumstances. But this is really, really tough. And now, you know, there are two possibilities. Obviously, they're going to appeal this, but it's really now up to Vladimir Putin, because the United States has made it very clear that it wants Brittany Griner out. And President Biden has made that very clear by the actions that he's taken and the State Department. So now, what's happening behind the scenes? Will there be a deal? You know, I have to, Dana, as I'm looking at this, I'm struck by how really dramatic this is, because, you know, usually when things like this happen, and they're not that common, but if there's an exchange, it's usually all agreed to behind the scenes. And sometimes, you know, the world doesn't even know that somebody's arrested, and especially in the spy world. And then there's an exchange, and then it happens. And the dramatic moment might be, you know, two prisoners walking across a bridge, as happened, you know, back in the old Soviet days. Here, we're watching Brittany Griner in that cage in a prison getting that sentence. So it's extraordinary, and it's disturbing, because you have that human drama taking place, and then you have the big picture of, you know, the relations between Russia and the United States, which right now are abysmal. And then overriding that, you have this war going on in Ukraine. It's quite extraordinary.
And of course, Jill, all of those things are extraordinarily connected, right? I mean, all those things have to do with the other. And I'm going to bring in Kylie Atwood. I mean, Jill was talking about the fact that this is so visual, so public. And this may be the way they do things in Russia, but it certainly is beneficial politically in the mind of Vladimir Putin to show the world that they have an American sports figure who has won two.
Administration has put on the table. The Secretary of State is publicly asked for the Russians to accept that deal, but the Russian foreign minister came back essentially and said, we want those negotiations to be quiet, telling the Biden administration to keep those to the quiet channels. But Dan, I do want to note that President Biden has just put out a statement, and I think you guys are probably getting that, but I do want to read that to you because it's significant that the President of the United States has felt a need to put out a statement in the moments following this 9-year sentence for Brittany Griner. And I'll just read that to you. President Biden saying, today, that is one more reminder of what the world already knew. Russia is wrongfully detaining Brittany Griner. It's unacceptable. And I'll call on Russia to release her immediately so she can be with her wife, loved ones, friends, and teammates. My administration will continue to work tirelessly and pursue every possible avenue to bring Brittany and Paul Whelan home safely as soon as possible. And of course, we'll be waiting to watch how those negotiations to get her home ultimately follow after today's sentence.
Kylie, stand by. I want to actually go to the White House. CNN's Arlette Saenz is there right now. Kylie read the statement. Arlette, what does it tell you? What are you hearing from your sources in the building there behind you about why it was so important for the President of the United States to release that statement in minutes after the sentencing was announced?
Yeah, Dana, it's very clear that President Biden is trying to stake out his position immediately to show that the administration is trying to do whatever they can to try to get Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan back. to the United States. You have seen the president release this statement detailing that they are working tirelessly to try to ensure that they are returned back to their families. And this comes just almost a month after the president directly spoke with Brittany Griner's wife, Sherelle, as well as the family of Paul Whelan, trying to offer them assurances that they are working to get their loved ones home to the United States. And remember, at the beginning of July, the president actually received a letter directly from Brittany Griner where she expressed fear over her detainment in Russia. She had written in that letter directly to the president, quote, "I'm terrified I might be here forever." So what you have seen from the Biden administration over the course of the past few weeks is trying to show that they are placing utmost priority in getting these Americans home. That is why they had offered this proposal to Russia for a possible prisoner swap. But now the focus will be on what those negotiations might look like. Of course, they have said that that counteroffer that Russia had previously proposed, that was simply not a serious counteroffer. And now the administration will be working to see what next steps they can try to take to try to get Brittany Griner as well as Paul Whelan home after they've been so wrongfully detained in Russia.
Arlette, we're going to go to Brittany Griner's lawyers right now speaking outside the courthouse.
Sentenced to 9. For nothing more than an intentional oversight. This is a miscarriage of justice. The U.S. Department of State has determined that Ms. Griner is wrongfully detained. Nothing in today's decision changes that determination. Together with consular officers from the U.S. Embassy here in Moscow, I attended every session of Ms. Griner's trial. I will remain in frequent contact with Ms. Griner and with her legal team. Secretary of State Blinken, President Biden's national security team, and the entire American government remain committed to bringing Ms. Griner home safely to her family, friends, and loved ones. And I, as Chargé d'Affaires of the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, will also do my best to bring her home safely. I will continue to do everything to care for the safety and well-being of Ms. Griner and of all U.S. citizens detained in the Russian Federation. We have no higher priority. Thank you.
Is it still possible to change her?
I have no further comments.
Thank you.
That was Elizabeth Rood, as you heard her say herself, the charge d'affaires for the U.S. in Moscow. Jill Doherty, I want to bring you back in. She said it was a miscarriage of justice and said that President Biden and the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, and the entire American government remain focused on trying to get her back, get Brittany Griner out of the penal colony that she's apparently going to be headed to momentarily and back to the U.S. I want to pick up on something that you mentioned earlier, which is obviously a very complicating factor for the U.S. in these negotiations that they're going to try to push in earnest now, which is, Kylie mentioned, the ball is in Russia's court, and there is a lot that Vladimir Putin wants right now when it comes to things to extract from the U.S. How likely is it that he will move these negotiations outside of the realm of just a prisoner swap and try to get the U.S. to back down on sanctions, on giving money and arms to Ukraine, and on and on and on? I mean, there are a lot of things, to use a very unsophisticated term, that Russia wants.
I don't think that is going to happen. I mean, they are connected. That is, that's the context. But for the United States to stop giving arms to Ukraine or stop the sanctions, it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen, but do you think that totally separate, but do you think Putin will push it anyway?
Well, he is kind of, let's say, domestically perhaps, or in the relationship with the United States, sending a message and pushing things and getting some of what he wants, which is to put the United States, to get back at the United States for what the United States is doing to Russia, to show that the United States can't, this is all in quotes, but can't push Russia around, that they have their own legal system. And, you can't, just because you have laws, about drugs that aren't that serious. We don't, because we are Russia. We have, our traditional values, et cetera. I mean, he's scoring, I would tend to think, he thinks he's probably scoring his own points. Now, is that enough for him? And how long will he drag this out? I think that's would be worrying to me, because as this goes on, it's really, really painful. It would be very painful to see Brittany Griner go off to a penal colony and not know whether there's really a deal. So the answer to that, I think, really is only in Putin's, mind and heart of how far he wants to push this. But, I think he realizes some of the reality of this. I don't think Ukraine is going to change, but he may be satisfied with just a period of really, making it difficult for the Biden administration, dragging this out and playing hard to get until the end.
Fred Plankin, I want to go back to you on the ground in Moscow. You've been covering this since February, when